Howdy doody! It's your favorite apes teacher, and thereby your only apes teacher, Mr. P. Today we're going to talk about two different things. So I've broken the PowerPoint up or the video up into two spots. The first are non-anthropogenic pollutants like CO2 and particulate matter, and after I'll talk about indoor air pollution. So most of the non-anthropogenic pollutants fall into these two categories: carbon dioxide and particulate matter. Where is this carbon dioxide coming from? About 40% of it comes between atmospheric exchange between the air and the ocean. CO2 regularly dissolves out of the ocean and into the air, and then back from the air into the ocean. So that's where a lot of CO2 is coming from. It also comes from plant and animal cellular respiration. Remember, plants do it too. And this is the chemical reaction where glucose and oxygen go in, and carbon dioxide, water, and energy come out. Happens in your mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. If this reaction sounds familiar, that's because it's a combustion reaction. Yeehaw! It also comes, a significant chunk comes from decomposition in the soil. Decomposition is basically this chemical reaction, except instead of using glucose from like live food or animals or something like that, you're using it from decaying plant and animal matter. And a very small proportion of carbon dioxide also comes from volcanic eruptions. Volcanic eruptions can also produce sulfur dioxide, and they can also produce particulate matter. Particulate matter we talked about already, but natural forms of particulate matter include things like sea salt. If you ever go to the ocean and the air tastes kind of thick or sticky, that's because there's salt dissolved in the air. It can also be dust. Think about the Dust Bowl, right? That's an airborne natural source of air pollution. Secondary sulfates, which can come from volcanoes, and they're a little bit larger. Instead of SO2, it's SO4. As well as things like pollen. You might be allergic to it if you're like me. You see it on bees and plants all the time. Carbon produced from wildfires, but also particulate matter like soot and ash being produced from forest fires, brain fart, and volcanic ash, which I mentioned already. Again, soot, ash, particulate matter. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for natural sources of air pollutants. Pretty straightforward. Now I want to talk about indoor air pollutions. If you do not know why I put this picture here, Google SpongeBob indoors and find the video and then educate yourself. But anyway, putting that aside, I want to talk a little bit about what indoor air pollutants are, where they come from, how they can hurt us, and what we can do to mitigate them. So indoor air pollutants can come from a variety of different locations in your house, from the garage to the kitchen to the attic to the bathroom, the yard, whatever. But indoor air pollutants have their own special section in this unit because some of the indoor air pollutants aren't outdoor air pollutants. And the reason for that is because indoors they are trapped. They can't escape into the atmosphere, so they can increase in concentration very rapidly. And because you spend most of your time indoors, you're going to be chronically exposed to those higher concentrations of pollutants, which puts you at a higher risk. Some of these air pollutants are anthropogenic and some of them are non-anthropogenic. I'm going to break this discussion up into those two categories. IAP stands for indoor air pollutants. The four anthropogenic indoor air pollutants are products of combustion, lead, volatile organic compounds, and asbestos. The first three should be pretty familiar already. So combustion, we've been talking about this reaction for months now. It can produce carbon monoxide, which is dangerous to breathe. I'll talk about that in more detail in the next slide. It can produce nitrous oxide, which can lead to pneumonia and asthma. Sulfur dioxide, which can lead to bronchitis, emphysema, and asthma. Particulate matter, which can lead to asthma, COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, or disease, emphysema, bronchitis, lung cancer, and also tobacco smoke from pipes or cigars or cigarettes. If you notice, if you're ever asked to say what's a health impact from the indoor combustion, asthma is always a great choice because it fits most of these categories. Meanwhile, pneumonia is only for this one, emphysema is only for these two, so just keep that in mind. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about carbon monoxide. It's kind of special. I mentioned this already, but it comes from the incomplete combustion of fossil fuels. If there's not enough oxygen present, such as in an enclosed space, CO will be produced instead of CO2. And CO, carbon monoxide, is classified by the CDC as an asphyxiant because it will suffocate you It is poisonous. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a serious danger. You probably have a meter above your head right now. And the reason is that because it basically takes oxygen's seat on the bus in your body. It binds better to your red blood cells than oxygen does, so your body can't send oxygen around your body through the blood. Okay, so when we think about combustion, we got to think, well, who's actually doing combustion inside their homes? I have an electric stove, or I have a gas stove. If you use a gas stove, you're doing combustion, but gas burns way cleaner than coal or wood. And many people in developing countries of lower socioeconomic status rely on things like coal or wood or waste products from their crops, like corn husks or something, to start fires indoors and cook their food. Because they don't have access to natural gas or oil, meaning that these resources are accessible and cheap, so the people who don't have a lot of money are going to use those resources and are therefore at the greatest risk for developing some of these health issues associated with indoor air pollutants. This is a map showing the number of deaths from indoor air pollution. You can see the developing countries are in red, meaning that they see the most deaths per million people due to indoor air pollution. Meanwhile, the United States is doing pretty good, and some lesser developed countries than the United States are still struggling a little bit, but they're working their way towards cleaner indoor air. Here's a graph that shows household air pollution deaths by region. If you look, the thickness of the bar represents the number of people dying. So North America's line is very thin green because not a lot of people are dying. And the trend is downward because not the number of people dying each year is even decreasing. Meanwhile, in South Asia, you've got, in 1990, almost 1 million people dying of indoor air pollution per year, and a slow decline to 2017, about 750,000. So you got to make sure you're taking into consideration what your experience is like as an American versus someone living in a different country. So what can we do about this? How can we address this problem? Pretty simple. Ventilate your home. Get the air pollutants out of your house and into the outdoor air. Burn your fossil fuels with cleaner burning kitchen equipment, right? That's going to reduce the number of pollutants going in the air. You can also get more efficient energy appliances or energy efficient appliances that use less fuel and therefore produce less pollutants. Or you could switch to a different energy source if capable. Solar panel, hydroelectric, whatever, wind turbines, but even natural gas would be better because it burns a lot cleaner. And then lastly, my favorite, cooking outdoors, right? No indoor air pollution if you're not indoors, right? Look at this guy. He's having the time of his life cooking outside. Do you know what it's like to feel like you've been photoshopped over this background image? Because this guy does, and he's so happy about it. Look at him. Cook outside. Now, some indoor air pollutants that don't come from combustion that I'm going to talk about, there's 3. There's lead, there's VOCs, and there is asbestos. Lead can come from paint, and it can lead to lead poisoning and bronchitis. Meanwhile, volatile organic compounds can come from turpentine, varnishes, carpet, upholstery, not poultry, sorry. You name it, all sorts of synthetic chemicals, and it can lead to, again, asthma and bronchitis. This is an ad from the Kitchen Cabinet Manufacturers Association saying that formaldehyde's natural. It won't hurt you. Trees produce formaldehyde. True, but trees are outside, and the formaldehyde that is coming maybe used to finish your cabinets, Kitchen Cabinets Manufacturers Association, that is 50 to 100 times more concentrated indoors, which is why the CDC classifies formaldehyde as an indoor air pollutant, not an outdoor air pollutant. So take that, KCMA. And then lastly, asbestos, you've probably heard of it, but you may not know what it is. It's this sort of flaky, stringy material, and it's very, very fire resistant. It will not burn, so it's very appealing to people a couple decades ago. Oh, let's insulate our buildings with this. That way it reduces the chance of the building burning down. The problem is it can lead to cancer, asbestosis, which is sort of a more milder form of another disease called mesothelioma, which I'm sure you've heard of from those lawyer commercials, but mesothelioma is a cancer that infects the lining of your organs in your body. It's extremely serious. Here's a picture of someone's lung who's probably got asbestosis, decent exposure to asbestos. Here's chronic, regular exposure to asbestos leading to mesothelioma. Not good. So what do we do about it? We need to be removing it safely from our buildings, like this guy. He's all bundled up, so protecting his lungs. You can actually leave it undisturbed. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And if you don't touch it or mess with it, it should be okay. Or you can seal it in an airtight seal with some sort of paste or something. Here's a picture of asbestos and the sort of ceiling supports. If left undisturbed, it should be okay. Here's a meme. I'm sure you've seen the commercial. If you or a loved one is being diagnosed with mesothelioma, blah, blah. Yeah, it's kind of funny, but also it's pretty serious. It's a pretty serious disease. But if this helps you remember that asbestos leads to mesothelioma, glad it helped. Okay, that's anthropogenic indoor air pollutants. Let's talk about natural, non-anthropogenic ones. Mold and dust are pretty straightforward. In fact, dust is so straightforward, I don't even have a slide for it. It's just like dead skin cells that pile up. People are allergic to them, and you don't like breathing them in. And we'll also talk a little bit about radon. Mold is gross. I'm allergic to it. I'm getting triggered just looking at this picture. It can lead to some pretty severe allergic reactions. Sometimes I have difficult breathing if I get into a really moldy area. It can trigger asthma attacks, and I think it's pretty gross looking. It is totally natural, right? If it goes on your bread, it's kind of gross. You throw your bread out, but it's totally natural. But it's only really dangerous indoors, and even then, it's pretty mildly dangerous compared to something like asbestos. So what do you need to do? You need to either rip down and replace all the moldy areas or disinfect and clean them. Mold's biggest ally is moisture. So dehumidifying your home by improving the drainage or putting in a dehumidifier will help reduce the chance that mold will grow. Lastly is radon. This is one you probably aren't too familiar with. It's the second major cause of lung cancer in the United States. And it's a radioactive gas that forms when uranium breaks down into radium, and then radium breaks down into radon through radioactive decay, right? Half-lives. Uranium is found in the bedrock, found in soil, found in rocks, and as it breaks down, that gas will seep up through cracks in your home and end up in your house. The half-life of radon is about 4 days, but if it's in concentrated areas in an enclosed space, it can be dangerous to breathe. Here's a graph or a map showing geological radon potential based on the bedrock. You can see we're dark red, so where we are is not so great. Get your homes tested. How does it get into your house? Well, like I said, it moves up through the soil, through the bedrock, and get through cracks in the walls and the foundation. It can also diffuse into well water, which if you have a well in your home, or if you directly pump groundwater, it can be dangerous to drink that. Radon, like I said, is the number 2 cause of lung cancer deaths, but it's also the number 1 environmental cause of cancer deaths, as opposed to something like cigarettes. Speaking of cigarettes, if you smoke in your home and you have radon in your home, your chance of getting lung cancer goes up by 10 times. So some serious synergy going on there. It's pretty serious, so you need to get your homes tested. What else can you do besides just getting it tested? You can seal joints and cracks in your foundation or cracks between the walls and the floors and install venting systems to get the radon out of your house and into the air. There's a cold open scene in The Office where Michael gets pissed because Toby's been leaving radon kits everywhere. Don't know why that pisses Michael off, but who understands Michael? Toby's like, oh, we should air quality test, these are silent killers. And then Michael comes in, you're the silent killer. Boom, roasted. You don't know what I'm talking about? Go find it and watch it. All of these indoor air pollutants can lead to something called sick building syndrome, right? Whether it's VOCs or radon or molds or secondhand smoke, it can just generally lead to the indoor air quality of your workplace, for example, being subpar, leading to increased headaches, respiratory issues, fatigue, fever, cough, lower immune system. So you feel crappy all the time, and you probably don't even realize it's because of the air, because you're so used to it. So test the air where you live. Who is most vulnerable? We've talked about this before. The elderly, the young, and people with respiratory illnesses. Why? Well, in all 3 of those, they tend to have a reduced or weakened immune system. In kids, it's still developing. Kids get sick a lot. The same is true also for the pulmonary system. In young kids, it's underdeveloped, and in sick people and old people, it's weakened significantly for their lungs. Kids also are smaller. They have a lower body mass, but they're breathing the same air that an adult would breathe, so they're breathing in the same amount of particulate matter and pollutants, but they have a smaller body, so it's a higher concentration in their tissue. And they also spend most of their time indoors, which means they're going to have more chronic, regular exposure to indoor air pollutants. Here's a nice infographic showing all the different places where air pollutants can come from indoors. And that's all I got for you. So if you've got questions, write them down and bring them to class. Adios.